Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up our first segment talking about the Shohei Ohtani situation that has been going on and the allegations against his interpreter, Ippei Mitsuhara, and sort of the bigger scale implications as well in terms of gambling and professional sports. But now we are going to be headed into our second segment of the day, talking about Deion Sanders and his comments on the futures of some of his star players. So on Friday, he went on the Barstool Sports Podcast, $1 Million Worth of Game, and he talked about some of the top guys for Colorado in his son, Shedeur Sanders, who is by many people seen to be the number one quarterback in next year's class. Granted, not the strongest of quarterback classes as things currently stand, but the fact that he and Travis Hunter, he expects to both go in the top 4 of the 2025 NFL draft. But he also said that both prospects could absolutely be looking to, as he put it, pull an Eli, or it's going to be an Eli, in terms of them forcing their ways out of unfavorable situations where this has been a topic of discussion, especially as last week Robert Griffin III, former NFL quarterback, said that Caleb Williams should look at the way that the Bears have handled the Justin Fields situation over the course of the past few seasons, and that he should demand that the Bears don't draft him, which is something that in a different light I disagree with, because I do think the Bears have actually done a good job of setting up whoever their next quarterback is to succeed with the receiver options that they've added, with the improved roster as a whole, offensive line taking steps in the right direction. DeAndre Swift is a very solid running back, and their defense has taken some steps in the right direction as well. And now we're looking at this situation where, we saw the possibility. Caleb Williams' dad was talking about how they may remain in college for another season because of the amount of NIL money that college athletes can now make, that they're not desperate for the NFL professional salary like players were in the past, which is absolutely a factor. But at the same time, the level of money, or the amount of money, I should say, that a player can make off of NIL, and Shedeur Sanders is one of the highest paid college football players, and really college athletes as a whole, based off of the NIL deals that he's made up to this point. I think it's over $4 million even, which is, and I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, so correct me if I'm wrong, and he comes from a family, obviously the Sanders family, that we know is not at a dire need of money either way. So he is a little bit of a special case in this situation, but I don't think that this is going to long-term be the way that things progress here. Now, I'm always pro player over pro. I can't say always. The NBA has some level of pro player that can be almost a little bit frustrating, but overall, I think that athletes at any level should be compensated based off of what they sort of bring to an organization and the revenue that they make other people. They should also be compensated for that. So I do understand that we're heading into an era with NIL. We're still very early in this whole, era of that kind of payment that college athletes can make. But I also think that as much as you can make money in college off of these deals, especially when you're looking at a league like the NFL, which is one of course, the juggernauts in professional sports in terms of how much money you can make, it gets really risky in some of these situations. And one specific situation that I sort of look back to, and it's not, 100%, it was a handful of years ago, so I would have to revisit some of the specific situations that were surrounding it at the time. But I remember Dak Prescott having a very solid junior year when he was in college at Mississippi State, and seemed like he could sort of climb his way into being a high draft pick. He returned for a fourth year and was not quite as good, and or unless it was I again have to revisit this, but I remember the extra year that Dak Prescott stayed one way or another ended up hurting his draft stock, and he fell to the fourth round, which, yes, you're still getting paid in the NFL, but it is obviously not to the level of being a first round pick. And I think it's a real gamble a lot of the times if these players are going to try and stay in college long term and risk having an injury or just playing worse, where we saw two of the, top prospects in terms of quarterbacks heading into this draft in Caleb Williams and in Drake May. Now they're both going to be first round picks, so not that it's been, any sort of devastating turns of events, but they were seen as, automatic. Caleb Williams being a generational draft pick, the can't miss guy. Drake May, headed into the regular season of college football, it seemed like a lot of people were on the boat of any other draft outside of the Caleb Williams draft, he would go number one overall as well. And now there's a lot more questions that people have sort of generated as a result of some ups and downs this season, their teams not being quite as successful. And again, they're both going to be top 3, top 4 overall picks. So this isn't even that detrimental of a situation. But again, I do sort of push back a little bit. I think it's going to be tough to see, all these players. And granted, there have to be very special circumstances here with a lot of these situations where, the players, try and act bigger than the NFL itself. And obviously the players make up the NFL, but the ones with power are, of course, the owners. The NFL is a factory of all factories where we see it year in, year out of, these franchises continuing to move on while there's a very finite time period where athletes, even at the top of their class, can, produce at the highest level. You only have, 2-3 big time paychecks that you can get from the NFL. And I feel like gambling with that, maybe it works out for the likes of a Shedeur Sanders or a Travis Hunter, but I don't think it's always that easy to just sort of mail it in. They are still, now with all of these comments, we're still a full college football season away. We'll have to see how this all plays out, but I am not too sure how much we're really going to be able to see the players, force their will on these teams. Deion did give a list of teams that both of these players would be open to playing for. It's a little bit of a strange list in my eyes, but it was the Atlanta Falcons, Washington Commanders, Dallas Cowboys, Baltimore Ravens, and San Francisco 49ers. Now, I'll have to go back and see if he sort of expands on some of these ideas on why these teams specifically, but it is definitely a bit of a weird grouping here where obviously Falcons, Commanders are at the bottom of the draft order this year, or top depending on how you want to look at it, but bottom of the standings last year, Falcons won 7 games, but still, we're in the top 10, in the top 8 specifically in this coming year's draft. And then you have the Cowboys, for as much drama as we hear some of these family members of Cowboys players like the Diggses, we've seen the Lambs, the Parsons, the Prescotts, all of them, their siblings or family members getting involved in the conversation about sort of the high stakes pressure under these, but who knows? To Kirito's comment about the NFL hating the the celebrations of some of these anime shows, I gotta be honest, I couldn't tell you why. I feel like the NFL has taken some steps in the right direction in terms of allowing a little bit more fun, but at the same time, with Roger Goodell, you never really know what you are going to get from him. The NFL, in all aspects, really have been extremely inconsistent in some of their punishments and such, with some of the fines. Yesterday on the show, we talked about some of the defensive players that have received fines for hits and such, and it's not the smoothest run organization, obviously, in the NFL. So I couldn't give you the defined answer as to that. But I just feel like it is interesting going forward here, because as much as we are heading into more and more area, like if you look back at the Deshaun Watson situation when he wanted out in Houston, and for as much, of course, drama that went on as he was being accused of the sexual harassment suits at the same time, he ended up getting what he wanted in going to Cleveland, the Texans getting a ransom of picks, and Deshaun Watson getting a fully guaranteed contract as a result of it. So we've seen quarterbacks now be able to assert their will a little bit more in recent years, to a level that we haven't seen in the past. Quarterbacks, obviously, the reason why they're sort of on this level that other players aren't, and we've seen the running back market sort of take a hit by the past handful of seasons, is because the idea with running backs, and it's sort of a microcosm, but the biggest example of the bigger overall story, is the fact that everybody's replaceable in the NFL for the most part. Quarterbacks are a little bit of the exception to that, which is why we see some of these quarterbacks have more power than anybody else, and why Caleb Williams could have been an interesting case coming into this draft. But at the same time, I don't know how far we are fully going to be able to come. I know that a lot of people are signifying that this is the beginning of this new, era. Again, I don't want to overuse the term, but sort of new era of, with the NIL, players being able to determine their futures a little bit more going forward. I just feel like even with those cases that could possibly be the result, it's very far and few. There's just not going to be a significant amount of those players that can ultimately change the landscape of the NFL long term, or on a, league shaking course like that. Kirito asks, Dak Prescott going to ask out by the trade deadline? I feel like they're going to find their way to an agreement. I expect Dak to be back. I definitely don't think that he's going to be traded mid-season unless there is something really wrong with the organization. For the Cowboys, I would imagine that they're going to work out a long-term deal with him, that they are going to pay him a massive number to stay in Dallas, which I know isn't the most popular idea for a lot of people. I can understand why they would, and I don't think that the Cowboys are necessarily in a situation such as you were in the live show yesterday. We talked about some of these quarterback-friendly environments where you have the San Franciscos, the Miamis of the world, where they have all of this surrounding talent and they have incredible coordinators of the offensive game that make it easy to succeed in the environment. I just don't believe the Cowboys are at that same level. CeeDee Lamb doesn't get enough credit as one of the best receivers in the league. Obviously, now he's being talked more so about it based off of this past season. But outside of that, I don't think the Cowboys are tremendous on offense. They just lost a couple offensive linemen to start this year, and they haven't really added anything else yet. Now, maybe it is a mistake for them to cough up that much money to Dak Prescott, but I also do think that he's coming off of his best season of his career. I do not blame him for the playoff loss. I thought that fell on the laps of the defense, who just got ran over by the Green Bay offense. So I expect Dak to be back in Dallas for the foreseeable future. I don't think that they let him hit open free agency at any point. Now, we'll see, but that would be so opposite of this whole all-in mantra. I feel like that they talked about headed in, and I know at this point it's been talked about too much. Clearly, that was a misspeak almost by Jerry Jones, because the organization was not ready to be all in on this year in particular. But unless you really believe that Trey Lance can emerge as a long-term option, which I don't want to fully turn the page on him. I feel like he never got the full chance there. But unless that's going to work out, I don't think that the Cowboys have a backup plan. And they're going to be very interesting to see going forward how they choose to operate. But we're going to be continuing on with some NFL thoughts in our next segment as we preview some of the team win lines that were just released by DraftKings yesterday. Just going to be running through these, and I will be pointing out which lines I thought stood out the most, as we've also been talking about gambling on this show as well. So stick with us, and we will be right back.